My vegetables have consistently tested out as some of the very best for nutritional quality, but here's the dirty secret. They would also test out as some of the very best for nutritional quality if I were growing conventionally. It's an agronomy issue, it's not an organic issue. Organic is one aspect of quality, but it is not a substitute for quality. And as a crop improvement association, we should be at the absolute forefront of not only making that point, but in attempting to move the quality, at least of the organic crops, forward to something that's much more appropriate. That's what we're fighting against. And the dilemma is more obvious with produce, but if we're to compete over the long term, it's going to have to be on the basis of demonstrable quality superiority. Otherwise, as a crop improvement association, we're kind of irrelevant, aren't we? If we can't improve the quality of what's coming off our farms demonstrably in relation to those crops that other people are growing using a system that's not as healthy. The government are also undermining the free market in many situations unrelated to water. The American Constitution runs to about 7,500 words total, including amendments. In comparison, the U.S. Department of Agriculture definition of cabbage is 30,000 words. And they're now adding another 7,000 or 8,000 words, which will, amongst other things, require me to obtain a federal permit in order to grow and sell a cabbage entirely within the state of Kansas. Does organic actually make a difference here? Is organic going to be enough to overcome that? I don't know, but I doubt it. In case you haven't figured it out, this is not going to be one of these totally upbeat and syrupy standard issue keynote addresses. But I think it's time that we actually begin to face some of the real challenges that all agriculture must confront. After 4 decades in the organic world, I've got to raise those tough questions, even though I've got grounds for some optimism, and I will get there. I think that our entire industry is in some doubt, and it's a thorough mess. It's a huge mess, besides, quite aside from the boosterism that comes from the Organic Trade Association and a lot of their processor members. They want to capture a 1% organic sales checkoff to feed their little organic rats. No, excuse me, organic rats. It's a Freudian slip, I guess. But shucks, I think family-based agriculture across the board is in some very, very serious doubt. And what are we going to do about it as OCIA? Because family-based agriculture is something that's worth working towards, and it's worth fighting for, and it's worth passing on to the coming generations, no matter what production system is used. Back when I was a kid, in the early 1950s, America counted some 6 million family farms, comprising approximately 20% of America's population when you included the families on those farms. 80 years before that, the family farm was the keystone of American middle-class prosperity. These days, we've got fewer than 2 million official farms in America, using that desperately old $1,000 threshold that was established in 1948 to define who is or is not a farm. If we simply adjust for inflation, that comes out to something like $10,000 of sales per farm. And if we use that as the criterion for defining a farm, then we're down to about 500,000 farms in America, not 2 million. And that represents well fewer than 1% of the American population instead of 20, including whatever families are involved. And the USDA also indicates that for gross farm sales under $50,000, most of those farms only rarely make an actual profit. If it's not profitable, it's not sustainable. End of discussion. And if you set the hurdle at that $50,000 profitability threshold, now you're down to something like 200,000 farmers in the United States. That's something like 0.2% of the population. And here's the shocker. That is a 99% collapse in the number of family farms in just 2 generations since I was a kid. We've lost 99% of our farm families in 60 years. Let that sink in. The problem is even worse because many of the farms are not particularly well managed. Most farmers, conventionally and organic alike, don't actually think or function like the business owners they are. And on top of it, too many families, farm families and otherwise, are in emotional and financial and other kinds of troubles. Farm families are not immune to the real struggles that people are facing these days. I've sat around thousands of kitchen tables in 3 different languages. I kept encountering exactly the same problem. Where are the kids? ¿Dónde están los jóvenes? Où sont les jeunes? Where are the youth? Why are they not there on these farms for the inspections? Don't they want anything to do with agriculture? Why did they leave? Who's going to take over? Most of those kids have fled the farm. They were drawn away on the one hand by glitzy city life and the prospect of much more money elsewhere, and crushingly often they were driven away by a controlling, cranky father, unwilling or unable to mentor his children or see the true value of what he's doing. Cochabamba, Bolivia, Cajamarca, Peru, Quimper, France, Kindersley, Saskatchewan, Garnett, Kansas. It really doesn't matter. It's the same problem all over the place. And as an international crop improvement association, we in some ways are uniquely situated to try to begin to shift the tide a little bit. Far too often, the biggest barrier to truly a sustainable farm is dad. Let's confront that. This is not unique to organic production systems, and it might actually be worse on the conventional side. There comes a time when we have to work our children into management positions and then back them up as they make the inevitable mistakes that they're going to make early. If we do not, what we thought would be the future generation on the land usually ends up at a wage job and living in town. Later this afternoon, I'll be offering some concrete management solutions that are actually not big shifts, but change the way we could perhaps deal with that dynamic. We must be willing, as fathers, to step aside gradually so that our sons and daughters can attempt to grow into that management sweet spot that begins at about age 40. But we have to start preparing them and training them at about age 15. These children are our most important crop, and we must nurture them, lest we see that family land sold off to yet some other corporate farmland consolidation. The most important way we can do this is to get them involved at an early age and let them make mistakes. To be very blunt about it too, we also have to treat them decently as human beings. And I know that doesn't happen all the time. They're by far the most important thing we grow, and agriculture is demographically moribund because, in large part, we as fathers have devalued our profession, we've devalued our children. So why is it a surprise that most of them eventually bugger off? Sometimes they're told, oh, you don't want to farm even, just go get a job. We must maintain some kind of gentle suppleness and an absolute focus on the things that really matter if there is to be any chance that our operations and perspectives are to be carried forward to the rising generations. In my years as an inspector, I saw far too many children alienated and isolated by their parents. It was agonizingly obvious. And how sustainable is that? Over the years, I've had the privilege of working with many Amish farmers in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Ontario, Indiana, Wisconsin, Kansas. Amish men often consider farming to be such a blessing that somewhere around age 50, they step aside. They hand the operation over to a son or a nephew, and then they go for a second career, making furniture or harnesses or shoeing horses or any one of a number of occupations. But they step aside so that the younger men can take over the farm at an age when it matters. We English, as they call us, have a lot to learn from them and from that approach, because as old-fashioned or as out of date as it might sound, or some of their farming practices might be, the primordial difference is that they would far prefer to have their neighbor than to have their neighbor's land. In our Kansas River bottom, we are the only family left which owns our property, lives on that property, and farms that land. And that is on soil that is in the 1/10 of 1% of the best soil on the face of the planet. My nearest neighbor is a mile away in a rented house on an old farmstead. And the land for that house is farmed by a land renter who lives many, many miles away. When I was a kid growing up elsewhere, that valley, that valley had 51 families out there in our one little bottom. There were a bunch of kids. They had a school. Every bit of it. It's gone now, except for us out there. There's that 99% collapse again, brought right down to one little river bottom in Kansas. It's the same as the national picture, and I find that frightening. Some people call it progress, but I just don't think so. It's occurring all across American agriculture. A 40-acre almond farm used to support a California family for generations. No more. If the house hasn't been burnt down by vandals or illegal immigrants or bulldozed by the new owners, it's occupied by squatters and crooks and people on the run from the law. How sustainable is that? Which is why, as an alleged crop improvement association, we've got to be brutally honest with ourselves. So let's try to set aside all the common assumptions and presumptions. What the hell are we actually trying to do here as a crop improvement association? For 45 years now, I've continually heard that organic is the farming of the future. Is it really? For just as long, I've heard that diatomaceous earth is the wormer of the future, and that liquid seaweed is the fertilizer of the future. Well, we're 2 generations along now, and it hasn't happened in any of those cases. I think we need to begin to contemplate what really our role is here. It isn't going to happen because it's too rarely applied in conventional agriculture. Our true strengths as organic farmers are actually available to any farmer. And the distinctions we do make, like organic seed or seed treatment, or I think here I'll hit the wasp's nest like a piñata, even GMOs. They don't usually make a difference that actually matters to the land or to the family. We need to consider such things during our deliberations the next couple of days, because it can shape how OCIA moves into a world that is astoundingly different than it was back in the 70s and 80s. How different? Back in the early 80s, that river bottom farm where I am, it still had 7 families out there. It's about a mile wide and 2.5 miles long, that pond. And we had 7 families instead of 50, and now there's just 1. The farmers produced spinach, potatoes, cabbages, sweet corn, watermelons, cantaloupes, sweet potatoes, apples, corn, beans, wheat, and a lot of hay. In eastern Kansas, we had over 6,000 dairy farms, and now there are fewer than 300. I want to emphasize that these changes affect farm families. And one reason farms consolidated is that there are so few kids to take over the farm, and even fewer fathers willing to let them. Conventional or organic, to some extent, we did it to ourselves. More government policies, more grants, more programs, more subsidies, more farm bills. It's not going to fix that. I'm going to put on my agronomist hat here for just a moment and hammer a couple of stakes into the ground. First of all, about 80% of what we call organic is nothing more than good agronomy, which is too often being tossed aside in a rush for government subsidies and unsustainable profits. I have on my bookshelf a 350-page agronomy text published by Wiley, the leading scientific publisher, nearly a century ago. It's entitled Green Manures. There's absolutely nothing to prevent a dedicated farmer, conventional, from implementing those practices. And some of them are beginning to do it. We'll be looking at some of those details in the practical soil and nutrition workshops tomorrow. But my point at this moment is that we're not so avant-garde as we like to think we are. So what will attract coming generations of farmers, if not some sort, what will attract coming generations of organic farmers is not some sort of self-centered virtue signaling, look at how good we are, look at us. What's going to bring future generations to the land and back to the land is prosperous and enjoyable family farms, whether they are conventional or organic. And that presently is going to depend on better management and more emotionally mature fathers. It's utterly dependent on profits, and those profits are driven primarily by markets. If it isn't profitable, it isn't sustainable. End of discussion. And if it isn't sustainable, it's not attractive. And if the markets are not reliably there, then the profits will not be there either. Right now, the markets are, I believe, a lot more shaky than is first evident in all the Organic Trade Association hype about growth of the organic market and their need for the supporting checkoff. Growth in the organic market is measured by retail sales. And that is being driven entirely by high margin, processed, packaged food. Excuse me. When you get to the essentials, I fail as a farmer to see any core or fundamental difference between a $6 bag of organic cornflakes, for which the farmer sees about 7 cents, and a $3 bag of conventional cornflakes produced at the same plant, for which the farmer sees 5 or 6 cents. Over the years, I've inspected hundreds and hundreds of processing plants, and I know what a small percentage of the final price is actually represented by the ingredients. As buyers continue to put downward pressure on farm prices, the organic business becomes increasingly commodified. I'm going to talk about these larger trends in my organic marketing workshop this afternoon, but I already know of many situations where the local elevator has put a floor under the organic price offered by the processors. Processor officer this month. Oh, well, I can get 20 cents a bushel more than that down at my local elevator. You know, that's really an odd situation, but it's not uncommon. What's going on here, I think, is that a number of large corporations have shouldered their way into the market, and they're in the process of liquidating, converting dollars, converting $2 in their bank, all the market value of the word organic, which has been built up across decades through immense experimentation and hard work.